What was the clap?
There's the clap.
Right, so Alexander has clapped, so we are underway. It's Horizon Unpacked. It's a train strike day, DT.
It is.
How was that for you?
The tube was rammed, if I'm honest, so it took a while. But I think at least I could get on the tube. You had to sort of wander miles, I think.
I threw the towel in on the bus, the Noble 261, which, a note to anyone travelling from southeast London to Lewisham. There's no bus lanes on the 261 route. Do the 208, and don't get a frustrated bus driver, because boy, was I feeling queasy by the time I got off that bus. But the walk did me good to have a bit of walk up to the DLR, and once we were on the DLR, it was all working fine. And of course, the good thing about getting in, as we all have done, because we're very dedicated at Skadi on a train strike day, is that it should be nice and quiet for the podcast recording, which is always good. So Damo, what's been happening? Because I'm conscious we kind of pile into Horizon, but I wouldn't mind putting a bit of context around what's been happening since the last time we spoke, because it might be useful for our audit colleagues and other people working in control functions.
So if you look at the equity markets, a lot of people look at the equity markets powering to all-time highs. You'd think sort of everything was all fun and games and smelling of roses, but you have seen bizarrely a lot of layoffs in the banks, and actually it sort of brings us round to the sort of thought that actually everyone assumes that positive equity markets should be good for the banks, they should be doing lots of deals, etc., but actually it's not really the case, and quite often the equity division of a bank is not actually a particularly profitable area for the bank. Certainly we saw that back in our ING days. It's the debt and the debt and the fixed income and FX side that tends to make all the money. And actually, you've seen 23 was a drought for deals. You had all these private equity guys that were not being able to bring deals to the table just because all those valuations were starting to collapse. And you've hence seen banks starting to lay off because of that, because they're just not bringing in the fees that they were. You come more from that fixed income side or that hybrid side. You can probably attest to that.
I think it's a really interesting observation and an accurate one, really. And it just points out the breadth and the depth of the financial industry and what all the different components that are important. And yes, indeed, we're looking at equity markets, in most countries and regions hitting all-time high. I don't want to, we're going to have a spoiler. We're going to talk about Autocallables, which that performance could be a big thing. I guess the other thing out there as well, which was a big thing for you and I 20 years ago, probably and more, consolidation in the financial sector.
Yes,
Is it back?
Having said there was no M&A last year, we have seen some this year actually in finance. So yes, two venerable UK old-fashioned-ish broking firms, what you would describe as a broking firm, have looked at tying up. So that's Panmure and Liberum, and that's sort of on top of, I suppose, Deutsche looked at what took over Numis last year as well. So maybe we are starting to see the sign of a bit of consolidation there. It has been tough. I think it's definitely been tough down at the lower end of that UK market for people.
And equity businesses, DC.
Equity's
back. Having just, I don't come to bury equities. I come to celebrate them. But it's interesting. So, but it's been the longest time, I think, there's such a wave of stuff going on around the kind of turn of the millennium, sort of City, Travellers, BT, Alex Brown, Deutsche, and then in beyond that to sort of, Barclays and RBS and ABN AMRO, that fight, that tussle, and who got to pick over Lehman. But really, since then, I don't think we've seen that much. And
certainly not over here in Europe that I can think of.
And
actually, probably not really in the States. Big, none of those big blockbuster deals that we did see, as you say. So it'd be interesting to see if that pans out. And unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily bode well for job prospects for some of these people, because you tend, obviously, after a merger to see layoffs or consolidation in departments.
And let's not forget the kind of forced, bringing together of Credit Suisse and UBS as well.
Yeah.
So three things happening out there. Maybe that's enough to say there's been a wave. Will it have momentum? Will Deutsche, room to be looking at other things, other other partners. Be interesting to see what happens there. So, and it just, obviously we're here to talk about Horizon. Horizon is where we do a bit of horizon scanning, try to put people on the control function on the front foot, tell them what's coming over the horizon. That's the idea. We've had some calls come in, haven't we?
We have, yeah. As we were discussing beforehand, there's a couple of things that we have been talking about. Some, for quite a while, that have come to fruition. Certainly, the NDA stuff that's come out. The FCA have said they're looking at sort of non-financial disclosure issues, and they came out in mid-Jan. Looking at getting the banks to start to report to them their instances of sexual misconduct and bullying. This is something we're talking about all the way back in June of last year. Something that we felt people should have an eye on, and it's interesting to see that it does seem to be coming to fruition now.
Absolutely, definitely one that we saw coming over the horizon. It's now here. So that's one for people to have a look back on. If you miss what we said, it's in the June 2023 horizon. All the previous horizons are on the website. Go to the Skadi, SkadiLimited.com website to have a look at our research.
Yeah, unfortunately, we weren't chatting about it back then because we hadn't started Unpacked then, but definitely you can read about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we were talking last month about two things which seem already to be coming home a little bit. Scrivener's errors, that's such a good one to talk at year end. And we had the FT talking today about their unhappiness with SEC filings, with the amount of errors in SEC filings. And they really are errors because it's where people have just broken links and it just says literally error, ! Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. It's that. I think it's probably a lot of it comes down to sort of word type things where you're referring to a clause and then it gets deleted. Not that anybody copies and pastes prospectuses at all, obviously. And so it's trying to refer to something, and I can't remember the exact term. It's just like error, that's not there.
Yeah.
And I suppose it does bring into that call that you were talking about last month about the case that you did see with the Scrivener's error, where actually these things sound pretty trivial, but actually if something comes up about a clause and it says refer to this and it's not there, and someone litigates, funnily enough, it would be the lawyers rubbing their hands with glee, even though they might have made the mistake in the first place. But these can be important, as you attested to last month.
It's all fine until something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Because you don't need a contract until something goes wrong.
Correct.
And what you need the contract to do when something goes wrong is to work.
Yeah.
And often, because of this kind of stuff, it doesn't. It's hard enough to get contracts to work anyway because of all the unforeseen circumstances that can occur.
Well, yeah, even you've talked about this before in other documents about how you've looked at old contracts that refer to, for instance, a Reuters page and say, well, if there's a fallback, this is where you look, and that doesn't exist anymore. So it's kind of. It is, these things are important, and as you say, they only become important when there's an issue.
Yeah, and we're in a faster moving world.
Yes.
That's something that you and I can attest to. The way in which capital moves is faster, the way in which people move onto other platforms is faster. And how do contracts keep pace? Because obviously if you have that specificity like that about a Reuters page, that's going to be fallible potentially.
Yeah.
So, people thinking about stuff. And then the other thing that you were really talking about last week was the valuations around privates and illiquids. And there's been a sort of bit of a blow up. What's been happening?
Yeah, so over in Austria, there's a big property empire called the Signa Empire, and I think headlines have been to the effect that there's sort of $5 billion worth of debt sitting on $250 million worth of equity. This thing seems to be unravelling quite fast. It's been put into insolvency in Austria, but I'm no expert on this Austrian insolvency. But I think each entity is now in insolvency of its own, so there's now sort of bun fights over where cash might go and stuff. But it's a mess, and actually, it sort of comes back to the how you mark these private illiquid assets, and property being the classical case. And a lot of money is being lent against some of these things. And if it turns out it's a sort of a house of cards, who knows? But it could be a canary in the coal mine. It'd be very interesting to watch this space. We haven't really talked about property as a place to look, but I think you are starting to see in the private equity world lots of stuff going around with marks, NAV loans, etc., etc. So there's definitely things to watch, to be concerned with in that area.
Well, look in the Far East and what the Hong Kong court decided over Evergrande last week. that should send shivers around people in the private equity world, because if you have someone like Evergrande who is going to be on the market potentially liquidating swathes of inventory, then there are pricing reference, and suddenly you have to start marking stuff down. You will probably find in the control functions that people in the front office will start trying to make the case to you that some of the Evergrande prints are unusual.
Yes.
They don't
Can't
conform
be the
with
the
real market. It's an accelerated liquidation and all that kind of good language as well. So, but anyway, lots of stuff to look out for out there. So, where are we going this month in Horizon? What are we saying to people to look forward on?
Well, two subjects. I think we seem to be sticking with two most of these months. First of all, looking at, you've written some stuff on autocallables, and then I've delved into the rabbit hole of quantum encryption and flagging that as a real area of concern that people need to sort of have on their radar. But maybe we should kick off with autocallables, and I don't know, Nick, maybe a very quick explainer of what they are. I mean, I know we've written about it.
I think also what I would say to anyone listening as well is that we find it very useful to put all of our thoughts down in our Discord, the Skadi Discord. It's a real treasure trove. Everyone's welcome. And you can go through and look back at all of the Horizon materials, but also at all of the other podcast materials that we have for the other podcasts that we've done, like Enron, Tulip Mania, etc. So there's plenty of background information in there if you want to do some further reading on stuff, for example.
Really useful stuff.
But autocallables are they are a product in the market which is one of the asymmetric products, let's say. Right. So, what do I mean by asymmetric? Well, they are a product where the upside is kind of capped. Because essentially, as soon as you sort of start making money, you get unwound and paid out, and that's the auto call happening. But if things go wrong, you're in for all of the downside potentially. As well. So that's really very binary. In fact, they're not binary because they kind of have three phases to them, if you like. So they essentially, what they do is they pay an enhanced return or coupon.
Yield,
right? Enhanced yield. And that is if whatever your reference is, your index or what have you, stays at a level or appreciates, then on the anniversary you get taken out, auto-called, and you get this enhanced return. Great. And that'll be a fixed percentage, whatever it is, 10% or whatever it happens to be.
And you these have been very popular, obviously, in this low interest rate environment we've been in for the last X number of years, and especially places like Japan, where rates have been zero and still are, bizarrely, very close to zero, whereas obviously the whole rest of the world has moved on. But
it's where you have low rates. People are obviously going to be interested for the opportunity to have an enhanced yield or the potential for an enhanced yield. There is another zone. If the reference index doesn't perform, then you don't lose your money. So people could talk in terms of capital protection. I think that's kind of a little bit, overplaying what they do, because you can't have a capital protected product where you can lose your capital. But people might be tempted to present that as a feature, and I think that's we're going to go into this, but this is where I think the regulator is having a problem in certain parts of the world over how these things have been marketed to the retail. And it is the retail that are largely affected by this kind of product. And then last of all, you have the situation where if the performance is so bad and the reference falls below a lower level, then the holder, the investor, is in for all of the downside, all of the performance. Right?
So literally, if you put, I don't know, 10 grand in, you'd get zero back. Is that what you're saying?
If the product fell to zero, if the reference index fell to zero, but usually the trigger to the downside is quite a big move. 20% down, 25% down. So it sounds unusual when you buy this product that it could occur, because you're thinking, stock markets go up. That's what we're
over time,
looking for. But you're in for it, and you can see how that could be marketed to people. At worst, if you had invested in it, then you're you've in a bad investment. But there is the chance that you could make out and get an enhanced yield if the performance is okay. If it doesn't perform but not too badly, then you keep hold of your money. But had you been in the alternative, you'd have lost money. And then, of course, if things go really badly wrong, well, just imagine if you'd been in that instrument anyway without the potential for the upside. That's the kind of the talk and the thinking about this stuff. Why this is a problem is because of that performance that we were talking about earlier in the podcast, i.e. markets generally everywhere are at all-time highs, but people in Asia, these countries where you've had prolonged, long, low interest rate environments, they have been enticed into products referencing a lot of Chinese indices, and Chinese performance across the board has been dreadful. If you look at the Hang Seng China Enterprises Index, which looks at Chinese companies listed in Hong Kong, then you have over the last 5 years that index has halved. That's the kind of performance we were talking about. 20%, 25% downside. So when something halves, then people have lost, half of their investment. And of course, we're not saying autocallables are a problem. We're saying, and the regulator is saying, the marketing of these could be a problem. That's what they want to scrutinise. And it's the Asian regulators that are stepping in and looking at this. But what we are saying is, look, this is born out of prolonged low interest rates, right? And we all know about Asia. For me, I was an Asian convertible bond trader. I relied on that retail investor base as a hedge for my credit, because they would love, take a convertible bond that I was asset swapping. Asset swapping is where I strip out the fixed income side of my convertible bond to leave me with this lovely, exciting equity option, convertible bond option. That's what I wanted. I didn't want to have the downside. I just want the option when it goes up. So I sell that fixed income to one of my wonderful salespeople who goes and packages it off and gives that enhanced yield to some retail investor in Taiwan or Japan. And that's how that market functions. So these investors are very, very important for the market. And that's, I guess, a secondary worry that people should be thinking about. Maybe not so much in the kind of the audit functions, I would think, but certainly if you're working in market risk, think about that. If the regulator starts clamping down on this stuff and starts scrutinising this stuff and starts putting restrictions around what retail investors can start to, take on, then you're going to find those businesses that rely on that for hedging are going to start to struggle. Okay? So that's sort of another thing to be thinking about. And maybe, the first line should definitely be thinking about this kind of stuff in their strategies for what businesses are they going to be, looking for more of, and what could potentially be danger businesses or businesses that may struggle going forward. But if you look around the globe, we've had, apart from the last 2 years now, I think it's 2 years, probably 18 months or whatever, prolonged low interest rates since the financial crisis. So actually, I think autocallables could well have been sold much more widely globally. We know that they are a product that is favoured in Switzerland, because Switzerland was always a market in Europe that had low interest rates relative to everyone else. And there were, problems or nerves around Nestle, Novartis, Roche, worst of autocallables in October last year, because the performance of Roche shares was starting to become a problem, where people might be sort of swept away if they continue to fall.
And I mean, from sitting in the bank's shoes, obviously they hedge these positions out, and the danger is, as they approach these barriers, they become for sellers. They can almost trigger them. Well, obviously they're not allowed to trigger these things. But there becomes a point where you're hedging out your Greeks, as it were, and as you approach a barrier, you've got a pivot point where things can start to get a bit tasty. So.
I think there's definitely elements of that, and you're seeing that in Asia. That that these so-called sort of snowball products, which is again another kind of colloquial name for autocallables, which have all kinds of wonderful names: cobras, lizards. I was reading a great piece by a guy called Jar Shalesh. So shout out to him, because he's written 3 really good articles on LinkedIn about autocallables and with these wonderful names, which I really recommend to people to read. Actually, and I realise I've sort of now kind of digressed and trying to think where we were talking about we were talking about the hedging of these
things just as they get close to their barrier. But
I think that what I think for the control functions around the rest of the world is you've got an opportunity here, because markets are at all-time highs.
Benign,
US, everything's looking good. You and I know from our trading experience how quickly markets can turn. And it doesn't take much. We're at the end of January, money's flooded in, everyone's been euphoric about the fact that the Fed stopped raising rates. We also know how uncertain the world is out there. I mean, look at what is happening in Israel, Palestine. Look at what is going on in Ukraine. Look at the rumblings of the Far East and China and Taiwan. The world is a really uncertain place. So would you want to say that high performances in equity markets are going to be maintained?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And actually, I suppose one of the issues is that, in fact, if you look at the sort of fear gauge, in inverted commas, the VIX out of the States, that's now trading at all-time lows as we approach all-time highs in the equity market. So from a sort of quant perspective, you feel you can issue quite a lot of this paper because vol is so low. So you could go, well, actually, maybe we won't have it normally we have a 20% barrier that it knocks out, or maybe we can do it at a 10 or something like that.
Well, this is another feature, right? So go back to 2003 and the vol crush that happened in convertible bonds, and I was trading convertible bonds. It was absolutely horrific, and you had again valuations below realised, and it's chicken and egg. Is the VIX depressed because of these kind of capital guaranteed notes, which are essentially sourcing volatility from retail investors that the banks have then got to hedge and offload the vega, thereby compressing the market? That was what was happening in 2003. Are we seeing it again now?
Yeah.
And it can be very, very, unpredictable.
Well, it flips, but exactly. Just that bizarre thing with vol at sort of sub 10, you want to be selling it like fury. But at 15, you're a massive buyer, so it makes no sort of sense. But but as you say, things change very quickly, and it can be these moves could be brutal. Anyway,
so
we'll see how that pans out.
So the point being that right now, we would say to people, go out and have a look. And one, how do you identify this stuff? Because as we've said, they can be marketed under all sorts of wonderful, exciting, sexy names because, of course, we're marketing this to all kinds of investors. So in your institution, how would you identify this? How would the front office identify all this stuff?
Yes, and the approval process and all that sort of stuff. The assumption is, they should be reapproved each time, but are they? You have to look at all that sort of stuff. That issues around that.
Well, you're going out to the customer base that needs the most care.
Yeah.
Are you checking that these are suitable? Are you checking that these are meeting their objectives? And as we've said, these are products which source, volatility from customers. How are you looking at, the price testing of what's going on? How are you assessing that the front office that are, writing these wonderful products, are they pricing these things fairly for the sophistication of the customers? So this is an area where if you're not tight on this, now get tight on it, because if the regulator comes looking, you do not want to have a reactive stance.
Yes.
That's the danger.
Well, and I mean, if you could look back at the history, there's been blow-ups in these products.
Time again.
Sort of, like clockwork, every sort of 5 or 6 years, someone goes, "Oh dear," and there's a sort of $100 million hole here and there. I mean, they can be, it's brutal. So as you say, be all over it, and especially as you say, the regulators are starting to have a closer look. It's an area.
I think you've betrayed the reason for my call, DT. That there's a bluff of these every couple of years. So maybe it's not such a fantastic Skadi Horizon, but actually maybe it is. It's a great Skadi Horizon call. So anyway, probably enough on Autocallables. As I say, if you want to read more about Autocallables or anything else that's in Skadi Horizon or on the Skadi podcast, do join the Discord because there is a real treasure trove on there. There are also forums for other people to discuss with each other. If you're working in audit, you're working investigations, you want to rub shoulders with peers in the industry and just have a chat about stuff. And also if you're a student looking for jobs in finance and want to, get to, rub shoulders with the people that are actually, walking the corridors, doing the reviews, etc. It's a great place to be as well because it gets you a real feel for the real kind of stuff that people really care about and look at as well. So that's the Skadi Discord. So the next topic, DT, we're going into the future.
We are going into
or
the future.
Are we?
Well, yeah. This could be an interesting one. So yes, quantum encryption, cryptography, whichever way we want to put it. I mean, there were some interesting. So we had Davos January this year. As every year, and a lot of chat there obviously was on AI, but cybersecurity, something that we've been pushing for a while, obviously was front and center. Constant hacks left, front and center for a lot of financial and non-financial institutions. But there was an interesting panel that was called there, looking at the sort of quantum threat, and all this is to do with is the fact that a lot of the data that sits everywhere around the world or is sent around the world is encrypted, obviously, and the worry is that as quantum computing evolves and improves, the chance for this encryption being broken is going up and up at an exponential rate. So, and this is not to say that the banks aren't aware of this. The banks definitely are aware of this, and some of the large banks definitely have decent-sized quantum groups within them. But the issue really is that, one, you've got the encryption of how data is moved around, and two, you've got the problem that data may well already have been stolen from an institution on the basis that it's currently encrypted and obviously you cannot read it. But at some stage in the future, you will be able to unencrypt that. So that does pose an issue because obviously there's a lot of sensitive information within a financial institution, and with any institution. So what we're just been flagging in this piece is people should just be aware of what is out there and be prepared for what can happen. So there's two main sort of prongs of attack on this. First of all, we're looking at what we were describing there, the sort of harvest now, decrypt later issue.
Yeah.
Whereby.
So let's look at that, DT. So thinking about our experience of finance, I'm sort of thinking about trade data, transaction data. I can't get too excited, right? Because once a trade is posted, it's out there. Everyone kind of knows about it. Maybe there's some privates and stuff. But what's the what can you think of some of the sort of the areas that people should be looking at? Because really, you want to try and identify what stuff is at risk.
Yes, there was talk about sort of the bucketing of data. So if you think about, as you say, pricing data, or even a bit more sensitive, so not maybe a price that gets reported to the tape, but prices that you've input into your models to allow you to price up a current trade. That is sensitive sort of to a degree now, but in 5 years' time, let's say if you get hacked and that data is stolen, is that sensitive? I mean, it's not particularly. You're not. I mean, you'd rather it didn't happen, but you're sort of. It's the time sensitivity definitely starts to diminish as time moves on. But there is a lot of stuff that sits within the bank. So I'm thinking of slightly, as we discussed earlier, NDAs, for instance, or board minutes, or discussing.
Any confidential matters, basically. Yeah. You're right. So, high net worth individuals that today may be okay, tomorrow maybe not so okay, and then in the future, or they're certainly moving into that kind of more controversial zone. Or it may be.
Or even if you think about, I suppose you could look back at LIBOR, for instance, which has happened a long time ago, but there would have been some pretty confidential discussions, you'd think, going on between internally within the banks, possibly with regulators, that you probably would still not like to see see the light of day.
Well, I think that's a great example, because you have to imagine there are probably still certain conversations that occur between regulators and the tops of these institutions at times of instability, where they are asked to do things or encouraged to do things, and maybe later that could be problematic or
yes.
sensitive. Sensitive.
And there's a lot of certainly some of the work we've done. There's a lot of data that passes from banks to the ECB, for instance, or banks to regulators. That just part of their sort of general day-to-day, send us information about this and that. That is, obviously is confidential between those two entities. But if that got out, that's that could be a real problem. So yeah, we're talking about how you bucket the data that sits within a firm to be, it's almost a priority list of, okay, this sort of stuff is very concerning if it's hacked and can be decrypted sometime in the future. So I suppose that's one level on it. And two, and there's no regulatory push yet, but as part of Davos, there was a paper that was co-authored with the FCA looking at how banks should start to be prepared, and a lot of that to do is just having an inventory of all the systems that sit within your banks. A bit like we were talking earlier about how we started to see some M&A in the banking business. A lot of these banks are created through mergers or have added new desks as they've moved through time. And a lot of the systems don't really get updated. What you do is you sort of put a patch on top of it, and then a patch on top of that, and then you have to write a sort of program that then allows piece X to speak to piece Y. I was reading some article about COBOL, COBOL, which is one of the old programming languages. A lot of bank code still sits on top of that because it's good, hardy, solid code, and actually taking it out to replace it with something is problematic. And I think the TSB issue that we saw a few years back was all to do with what happened there. Trying to switch a bit of old code off, and the knock-on effects can be huge. Yeah. So all this stuff is encrypted fine at the moment, and I'm sure it's that classic of you can go and speak to people and go, well, quantum is a problem you should be thinking about. A lot of people are I'm not sure when this is going to occur. Is it going to be 5 years, or could it be 50 years from now? And should I be investing a lot of money and time and effort trying to get myself prepared for something that may not, well, one, slightly really happen on my watch, but two, not really be an issue for quite some time. So.
It reminds me. I was watching a film on Netflix the other night, "Leave the World Behind." You seen that one?
No, but
Julia Roberts and Ethan Hawke, and they're a family sitting on the beach, and the little girl noticed this oil tanker out at sea, and they're like, "Oh, there's an oil tanker. That's interesting." And then a few seconds later, obviously the day's moved on, and she's still looking at the oil tanker, and it's getting a bit bigger, and it's getting a bit bigger, and eventually, Julia Roberts, gets her family up, and they run as the oil tanker comes in and collides. It does feel a bit like this with this quantum problem, because people aren't really talking about it. One of the things that I'm struck by, and you and I come from the front office, and we know what it's like. If you need to make, or you can demonstrate you're about to make money on something, you've got all of the wind behind you.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, the cloud has done for everyone is the easy adoption of technology. And in the front office, it's very, very easy in certain institutions to sign off and just get something.
Yeah.
If it's going to achieve something for you, you can demonstrate it. And, I worked in a place like Cantor Fitzgerald, for example, where all of your costs come onto you. So it's very hard to turn around to someone and say you can't have something if they go, well, I'm going to pay for it.
Yeah, yes.
I'm going to take it, I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to make much, much bigger return on this. And it's very hard as the kind of IT guy to go, this could be a risk or whatever.
Especially if it's a modelling program that everybody else is using, and you keep getting picked off because you're just missing, I don't know, some piece of data. So
absolutely, exactly right. That is absolutely what happens. And of course, with all this kind of SaaS type product, then you're getting an exchange of data. You're getting vulnerabilities, and I think that's first of all, to understand what kind of encryption do you have within your organization for all of these different systems, and where is your information actually going? and there are products out there that you can actually do this kind of work with. Amplify, for example, has a product that looks at all of your SaaS and does an audit and tells you, which I think is really, really a valuable exercise for people to do. And that is the beginnings of being able to identify and understand what kind of threat you have, and then work out how best, because obviously people have budgets and they've got to figure out how to deploy their budget to tackle this problem, because this is like the auto, it's definitely coming, but like you say, you don't know when. And I think there also probably is a little bit of a temptation to sort of sit there and go, well, is it our problem, or is this really the problem of Google and Microsoft and others out there in terms of the overall architecture of technology that we're reliant on? But I think as we've identified, there is so much secrecy and sensitive information within finance that people have got to take ownership of it themselves. Because I do wonder, Damian, if we've seen bank runs in the past. Everyone runs Northern Rock, and that was all about everyone being worried about whether they were creditworthy.
Yep.
I predict, because data is the new oil, this is the over the horizon. How long till we see a bank run because people go, oh, they're not data secure?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thought. Yes, and these banks, they hold a lot of information about individuals and obviously corporates as well. So no, I think you could be right. If you got an inkling that there'd been a big breach at a bank, and not that it had lost any money, but a lot of your data was now out there, then would you be tempted to go, actually, I'm going to shut my account down there and move somewhere else? I mean, you could be right on that. I mean, we'll see how long the quantum call takes. Could be Horizon Unpacked 2034 when we go, told you so. Back in
if we look at last month's calls, it might be the middle of next month, so just get ready. Right. So, well, fantastic set of topics for everyone. I'm going to plug the Discord again, and also I had my attention drawn to another audit podcast aside of the Skadi podcast. Which is in the, let me just get it up here, because it's great to have seen so many people in audit on the episode list. I've only just caught it. Inside the Auditorium, which is a podcast with Hazel Rowe. So if you are interested in getting into some of the characters in audit and what they, their responsibilities have been, that's a great audit for you. If you want to know what's coming over the horizon, what's about to happen next, get on the Skadi podcast. All right. Cheers. Until we speak next time, thank you for listening.